My beloved child, stop scrolling. Pause here for just a moment, because what you are about to hear carries a message your heart has been quietly waiting for. You did not arrive at these words by accident in this fictional spiritual story. Something has been stirring beneath the surface, something you could feel but could not explain, and now the silence around it is beginning to break. Your soulmate is trying to tell you something, not something small, not a casual thought, not a passing emotion, something important, something they have struggled to put into words. And the strange part is that they may have already tried to tell you without actually speaking. You may have noticed the distance, the sudden changes, the moments when their presence seemed unusually close, followed by silence that made you question everything. You may have felt that something remained unfinished between you. Perhaps you told yourself that you were imagining it. Perhaps you tried to move forward. Perhaps you convinced yourself that the chapter had closed. But somewhere inside you, one question refused to disappear. Why does this still feel unresolved? My beloved child, listen carefully. There are connections that end because they were never meant to continue, and there are connections that become quiet because something remains unspoken. This message is about the second kind. There is a truth your soulmate has been carrying. A truth that has grown heavier with every day they have chosen silence. They have rehearsed conversations in their mind. They have imagined what they would say if you were standing directly in front of them. They have typed words and erased them. They have opened a message window and closed it. They have started sentences that never reached you. And what they want to tell you is not necessarily what you expect. That is why I need you to remain here. Because the first thing they want you to understand is not about the future, it is about the past. They want you to know that the silence did not mean they stopped feeling. There were moments when they wanted to reach for you and did not. There were moments when they remembered you and pretended they had not. There were moments when your name appeared somewhere unexpectedly, and for a few seconds, everything they had buried rose back to the surface. They may have looked completely fine from the outside. That is what makes this story so difficult. People can hide enormous emotional storms behind ordinary behavior. They can laugh while carrying regret. They can work while thinking about someone. They can appear detached, while privately asking themselves whether they made the wrong decision. And your soulmate has been living inside that contradiction. Part of them has tried to move forward, another part has continued looking backward. They have asked themselves questions they were too proud, frightened, or uncertain to ask you. What if I had handled things differently? What if I had spoken sooner? What if I misunderstood what happened? What if they were waiting for me too? Those questions have not given them peace. They have given them a reason to reconsider everything. And now something has changed. Your soulmate has reached a point where pretending not to care has become more painful than admitting that they do. That does not mean they suddenly have every answer. It means the wall they built around their emotions is developing cracks, and through those cracks, something is beginning to emerge. A confession. But before you hear what that confession is, you need to understand why it has taken so long. Your soulmate has been afraid of the consequences. They have wondered what would happen if they contacted you. Would you respond? Would you reject them? Would you be angry? Would you ask questions they cannot answer? Would you remind them of everything they did not say when you needed them most? These fears have kept their hands still. They may have imagined the conversation 100 times. In some versions, you forgive them immediately. In others, you walk away. In some, they explain everything perfectly. In others, they cannot speak at all, and that last possibility frightens them the most. Because there are emotions that become harder to explain after time has passed. How do you tell someone you missed them while you were pretending you didn't? How do you admit that you cared while acting indifferent? How do you explain that you wanted to return but were afraid that returning would reopen wounds? This is the emotional battlefield your soulmate has been standing on, and there is another secret beneath it. They are not only afraid of your reaction, they are afraid of their own truth, because if they admit what they still feel, they can no longer hide behind the explanations they created. They would have to acknowledge that something about you remained different. They would have to admit that other connections did not erase this one. They would have to confront the possibility that the person they tried to forget became the person they kept remembering. That realization has been difficult, but it has also been awakening something inside them. My child, sometimes a person does not realize the value of a connection while holding it. Sometimes they discover its importance only after distance gives them enough silence to hear their own heart. That may be what has happened here. When you were close, there were distractions, fear, pride, other people's opinions, timing, misunderstandings, responsibilities, circumstances neither of you knew how to control. But distance removed some of those distractions, and when everything became quiet, your soulmate was left alone with memory. They remembered your voice. They remembered your expressions. They remembered small details you probably assumed they had forgotten. The way you reacted to certain things. The way you looked at them during a conversation. The little moment nobody else would consider important. That is what surprised them. They discovered that their mind had preserved things their pride wanted to erase, and one memory in particular keeps returning, a moment when you were trying to tell them something without saying it directly. Perhaps you looked away, perhaps your voice changed. Perhaps you became quiet, perhaps you waited for them to understand what you could not bring yourself to say. They did not understand it then, but they understand it differently now. That memory has become a doorway. Every time they revisit it, another question appears. What were they really trying to tell me? And now, strangely, they are beginning to realize that they may have misunderstood you. This is where the message becomes deeper. Your soulmate may have believed that you had stopped caring. They may have interpreted your silence as indifference. They may have seen you protecting yourself and mistaken it for rejection. They may have watched you pull back because you were hurt and assumed you were moving on. Meanwhile, you may have been waiting for them to show you that you mattered. Two people, two wounded hearts, two completely different interpretations of the same silence, and between them, a wall built from assumptions. That wall may be coming down, not because everything suddenly became easy, but because someone has finally become brave enough to question the story. Your soulmate has begun asking whether the version of the past they accepted was complete. That question is dangerous to the old narrative, because once someone starts questioning what they believed, they begin noticing details they ignored before. They remember who said what. They remember when certain events happened. They remember the conversation surrounding your separation. They remember the advice they received. They remember the warnings. And slowly, something begins to bother them. Why were they so certain? Why did they never ask you directly? Why did they allow fear to make a decision that affected two hearts? That realization has been painful, but it has also been necessary. Because the message your soulmate is trying to send you is not simply, "I miss you." It is much deeper. They want you to know, "I finally understand why you were hurt." Those words may never be spoken exactly like that, but that is the emotional truth beneath what they are trying to communicate. They are beginning to understand your side. They are beginning to recognize the moments when you needed reassurance and received silence instead. They are beginning to see that some of your reactions were not irrational. You were responding to uncertainty. You were responding to distance. You were responding to not knowing where you stood. And perhaps they now realize that they contributed to the very confusion they later blamed on the relationship. That realization can humble a person, and humility is often the doorway through which honest communication enters, but do not assume the next step will happen immediately. The next, they may watch quietly. They may search for signs that you are safe to approach. They may wonder whether you have changed. They may wonder whether they have changed. They may even convince themselves that too much time has passed. But every time they attempt to bury the feeling, something brings it back. A song, a place, a date, a familiar phrase. A dream. A memory, a random moment that should mean nothing but somehow means everything, and each reminder creates the same uncomfortable realization: I never finished this. My beloved child, unfinished emotions have a way of demanding attention. You can ignore them, you can bury them, you can surround them with new experiences. But if something inside remains unresolved, eventually it asks to be understood. That is what is happening now. Your soulmate is trying to understand what happened between you. And more importantly, they are trying to understand what happened inside themselves. They are beginning to separate love from fear. They are beginning to understand the difference between what they wanted and what they were afraid would happen. They are beginning to recognize how much their decisions were influenced by circumstances, and there is one particular fear they have not admitted. They are afraid that you no longer feel the same way. This may be the greatest obstacle between you, not lack of feeling, fear of discovering that the feeling is no longer mutual. They imagine you have healed. They imagine you have become stronger. They imagine you may have built a life without them, and instead of seeing that as something beautiful for you, part of them experiences it as evidence that they missed their opportunity. They wonder if they waited too long. They wonder if they broke something that cannot be repaired. They wonder whether an apology would even matter. That is why their message may come indirectly at first, a small opening, a subtle attempt to reconnect, a question that seems ordinary but carries emotional weight. A reaction, a brief appearance, a carefully chosen sentence, something that gives them information without requiring them to expose their entire heart at once. Do not overlook the significance of small communication in a story like this. When someone has spent a long time afraid, even one honest sentence can feel like stepping into a storm, and your soulmate is approaching that storm. But there is something they need to tell you before they can move forward. They regret one specific moment, not the entire relationship, not every decision, one moment, a moment when they had the opportunity to choose differently. They remember what they could have said, they remember what they actually said. And the difference between those two things has haunted them. They know you may not even realize how significant that moment was. To you, it may have looked ordinary. To them, it became the dividing line. Before it, they still believed there was time. After it, they began convincing themselves that distance was safer. And now they wonder whether that single decision changed the course of everything. There is an ache attached to that memory. They wish they could go back, but they cannot, so they are asking a different question. Can I tell the truth now? That question has been growing inside them, and the answer is becoming yes. Yet before they speak, they need to know whether you will listen. Not because you owe them another chance, not because you are required to reopen the past, but because they need one opportunity to finally tell you what they could not say when it mattered most. And that brings us to the most important part of this message. There is something your soulmate has been hiding even from the people closest to them. They have not told everyone how deeply this connection affected them. They may have minimized it. They may have acted as if you were simply someone from the past. They may have allowed others to believe they were completely over it, but privately, they have carried evidence that says otherwise. They remember, they compare, they wonder. And there is one question they ask themselves more often than they would ever admit. What would happen if I finally told them the truth? Not the convenient truth, not the version that protects their pride, the whole truth, the truth about why they pulled away, the truth about what they believed, the truth about what they later discovered, the truth about how often they thought about you, and the truth about what they still feel. That is the message waiting behind their silence. But there is a reason I am telling you to prepare your heart rather than your expectations. Because when the truth arrives, it may not arrive in the form you imagined. It may not begin with "I love you." It may begin with an apology. It may begin with, "There is something I never told you." It may begin with, "I need you to hear me before you judge me." It may begin with a confession that forces you to reconsider a moment you thought you understood, and once that first sentence is spoken, another truth may follow, then another, until the story you have carried in your mind for so long begins to look different. There is one conversation your soulmate has been preparing for. They have imagined sitting across from you. No distractions, no family, no friends, no outside voices. Just you and them, and in that imagined conversation, they finally say what they have been unable to say. But every time they reach the same point, they stop, because the next sentence changes everything. That sentence contains the real reason they stayed away, not the reason they gave everyone, not the explanation they used to survive the separation, the real reason. And when you hear it, you may finally understand why their behavior never completely matched their words, why their distance sometimes felt like longing, why their silence sometimes felt like a conversation, why they seemed to disappear just when the connection became emotionally intense, because there was something they were protecting, something they were afraid to reveal, something they believed would change the way you saw them forever. And now, after all this time, they are beginning to realize that keeping the secret has changed everything anyway. So, my beloved child, stay with this thought. Do not chase them, do not force an answer, do not surrender your dignity to uncertainty. Let the truth come toward you naturally, because something has already shifted inside the person whose name your heart has not forgotten. They are no longer asking whether they should tell you. They are asking how, and those are two completely different questions. The first comes from fear, the second comes from preparation. They are preparing, they are gathering courage, they are revisiting memories, they are deciding which words can carry what their heart has been unable to carry alone. And there is one final revelation I need to leave with you before this part ends. Your soulmate's message is connected to a moment you thought meant the opposite of what it actually meant, a moment you interpreted as them choosing to leave, a moment that may have convinced you that you were no longer important to them. But according to the truth they are preparing to reveal, that moment was not about losing feelings, it was about fear. And what happened immediately afterward is the part they have never told you, because right after they walked away, they turned back, they looked for you, they waited for you to stop them, and when you didn't, they made a decision that changed everything. They told themselves they would never come back, but they did not realize that the person who influenced that decision had left out one crucial piece of information, a piece your soulmate has only recently discovered, and when they discovered it, they did not become angry first, they became silent, because they finally understood why your eyes looked the way they did that day. They finally understood what you were trying to say. And now they are standing at the edge of a confession that could change the entire meaning of your last conversation, but there is one thing they have not yet told you, one sentence, one hidden truth, one reason they walked away that has nothing to do with what you believed. And when that truth is finally spoken, you may realize that the goodbye you thought was the end, was actually the beginning of the secret they have been carrying ever since.